Welcome to this live chat with Project FeederWatch, here hosted by the Cornell Lab Bird Cams team. My name is Ben Walters. I'm the communication specialist for the CAMS program. And behind the scenes today, I've got the CAMS project leader, Charles Eldermeyer. He's going to make sure everything runs smoothly with the chat and the Q&A tools, and he's going to answer any technical questions that you might have in the chat. So I'll be your host. Charles will be behind the scenes, and then we've got some special guests with us today to help us learn about the science behind feeder birds, and here to answer all of your burning bird feeding questions that you've sent in with us. Please welcome Emma, Greig, and Holly Grant from our Project FeederWatch team. Welcome, Emma. Welcome, Holly. Please take a second to introduce yourselves.
Hey, Ben, thanks for hosting this. It's good to be here and fun to see all the questions coming in from people. I'm the FeederWatch project manager, so that's my role. And Holly, I'll let you introduce yourself next.
Hi everyone, I'm Holly. It's good to be here. I'm the project assistant for FeederWatch, one of several assistants now, and I'm excited to get started.
So thank you guys so much for being here. We're super excited to chat with you today. We're going to go ahead and start things off by just orienting everybody about Project FeederWatch. How can people get involved? What kind of resources does Project FeederWatch offer for participants? And then just what makes this project so interesting and impactful about our understanding of winter birds and tracking populations and trends in winter bird activity. So after that, we'll go into a laundry list of great questions that have been sent in from our viewers today. We'll try to get to as many of them as we can. But first, Project FeederWatch. What is Project FeederWatch, and can you tell me a little bit about the history of the program? How did it get started?
Yeah, sure, no problem. Well, the concept for it actually began in the 70s in Canada through the Long Point Bird Observatory. A biologist up there named Erica Dunn thought, boy, I'd really like to know what's happening with winter bird populations. Hey, people love feeding birds. Maybe I could just get them to start counting the birds that come to their backyards, because you're looking at them anyway. So that was sort of the idea behind it back in the 70s. And then in the 80s, they realized, oh, well, if we really want to understand bird populations, we got to look a little more south than just Canada. So that was when the Cornell Lab of Ornithology joined in. And so since about 1986, 87, it's been a continuous data set following one counting protocol between the US and Canada. And it's just a really fantastic collection of observations of backyard birds at bird feeders.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that background into the project. Why don't we talk a little bit about how people can get involved with this exciting program, and why should people want to participate?
You want to take it, Holly?
Sure, yeah. So people of all ages can get involved here. We encourage people to watch in their backyard. We've got some schools and nature centers that have their own little count sites in their backyard. So we've definitely got some variety in our participants. And the best way to sign up is to go on our website. We've got a nice little join or renew button. It's right there on the homepage. It's bright red. Can't miss it. And you can use that to sign up. It's a whole lot of fun. It's a great way to get a better idea of what kind of birds visit your backyard. And, it doesn't require a ton of effort, right? You can just sit there all cozy in your recliner, look out your window and just count the birds. It's a nice way to wake up in the morning for sure.
Awesome. So we were talking about a little bit about, counting birds of Project FeederWatch. That's what it's about, right? So can you give a little background into the protocol? Like how do people actually do their counts, and who can participate in this? You mentioned there's schools and, different communities that participate together, but can can anybody participate? Do you need a feeder? What's the deal with that?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. You might think you need a bird feeder because it's called FeederWatch, but no, you do not need a bird feeder. And just this year, we have modified our little site description form so that people can record the fact that they may be watching birds without a bird feeder. That is such a valuable collection of data to start having coming in, people doing the FeederWatch protocol, but not having a bird feeder. Because that's how we're going to really be able to say, hey, are yards with bird feeders really different than yards without? Now we can finally answer it. So I really encourage folks, if you don't have a bird feeder, you still can do this program and we want you to. And then I don't know, Holly, do you want to describe the protocol a little bit?
Yeah, so when you're participating in FeederWatch, basically what we have our participants do is over the course of 2 days, we have them watch their backyard. Basically, their count site is what we call it. It's a predetermined boundary that you decide how big or how little it is. And you keep track of the highest number of each species that you see within that boundary over the course of your 2-day count. So you're counting, maybe you see 3 chickadees at once on one day, and the next day you see 5 chickadees at once. Your final number to report to us is 5. So it's that highest number. And then throughout the season, which runs from November through to the end of April, we ask that you report about once a week, but really you can watch as little or as much as you want. And when you're counting the birds as well, it doesn't have to be all day long either. It can be for 5 minutes, a couple hours. That's also pretty flexible.
Awesome. And I just wanted to point out that the FeederWatch season just started, right? So this is your busy time of year. Does it go all the way through winter, or what's the dates that the FeederWatch season spans?
Yeah, so it started Saturday, November 13th, and it's going to run all the way through until April 30th.
I'm sure you're going to be inundated with questions from now until spring.
Oh, yes.
We sure are already.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad that the season just started and you're going strong, and it looks like you have a lot of participants this year. So a little bit more about what people receive if they sign up. If they decide, okay, I'm going to sign up for Project FeederWatch this year. You mentioned you can sign up through the website, but what else is involved? Do people receive anything if they sign up? Does it, cost me anything to participate?
Yeah, so we send to people a poster of the birds they're most likely to see around their yards. Sometimes it can feel a little intimidating. Oh, I'll never learn all 600 birds in this field guide. But the average number of bird species that comes to someone's backyard is 11. So you can learn 11 birds, and we sure do have them all on these posters. So anyway, the poster that really gets folks going on bird ID. And then a really cool little calendar that you can use to keep track of your counts or your appointments. I love our little calendar. I use it all the time. What else do we send? Am I forgetting something?
So usually it's a welcome letter that gives you a little bit of information about the current season and a quick instructions with more links for how to access this information that's available online. I think we give a tally sheet still, right, Emma?
We might, but you can print them online. You sure don't need them from us, so we might stop. And it costs $18 to participate for a year, unless you're a lab member, and then it's discounted to $15. And that money goes to basically support the entire program. Were it not for that, people donate so much of their time, but because all the participants are also willing to donate this little extra piece of funds every year, that is what has kept this program going for 35 years. If we were counting on NSF to support it, it would have been long gone a long time ago. So I am send a lot of thanks to all the feeder watchers who have really funded this program and created this data set.
That's awesome. It's great to hear that you have such a loyal supporter base that's keeping the project going all these years. Speaking of the time that this project has been going on for, it's got a pretty impressive resume in terms of the impacts that people have that the researchers have learned from all of this effort, all of the feeder watchers, counting the birds in their backyard every winter, collecting them, reporting them. Can you go into just a little bit about some of the things we've learned from all of this data?
Yeah, there have been dozens of scientific papers written about different topics coming from the core FeederWatch bird counts. And the cool thing about it is that the topics, you would think, okay, all we can do is say the population of this species went up or the population of that species went down. But actually, you can overlay all kinds of other information onto these bird counts and say, oh, look, in places where it's getting warmer, we see warm adapted species are becoming more common. Or in places where people have hummingbird feeders out more often than they used to, we're seeing hummingbirds overwintering in places they never used to overwinter before. So we can study behavior, climate change, habitat use, disease. People record house finch eye disease through their feeder watch counts, and we've learned all sorts of things about disease dynamics thanks to this data set. Name a topic, I'll bet you could write a paper from FeederWatch about it. And I just noticed one little thing in the chat. I said that the prices of the thing in the US. In Canada, a membership is any donation to Birds Canada. I forgot to say that when I was answering the previous thing. So I just wanted to catch that real quick.
Awesome. And I just saw another quick question that ran through the chat. Are those published studies available on the FeederWatch website if people want to look at the findings?
Yeah, they sure are. We've got a whole list of them. Maybe Holly, when you do a little screen show, and you can just show where you go to if you want to see the list of articles, and then you can really see all the topics. And what we try to do in addition to sharing the papers themselves is often we'll do little write-ups about these studies and put that in our Winter Bird Highlights, which is our annual summary, or we'll write little blog posts about them, just so it's a little quicker, more like a little news piece about the research instead of folks having to read the actual paper. So yeah, there's a lot online about it.
I just shared a link in the chat. So if you're curious, you can click that link and check out all the publications, just in case we forget when we get to screen sharing.
Perfect, smart.
Awesome. Well, speaking of giving people a little preview of the FeederWatch website, why don't we go ahead and do that? Because I know you have a lot of great resources there available for anyone, not just Project FeederWatch participants. So if you want to give a quick rundown of the resources that you have there, Holly, go ahead and
yeah, I'll give just a couple of the most common ones. You're going to see a lot more on there, so I'll just go over them very briefly. Let's see here. All right, can you guys see my webpage here? All right. So this is the FeederWatch homepage. It's feederwatch.org. So you can just type that right in your address bar and this will pop right up. Like I said, right here on the homepage, there's this big red button that says join, renew, or donate. You want to click that to start to join Project FeederWatch, to purchase a membership. I'll just show you what that page looks like. So you'll scroll down here, and then depending on which country you reside in, you can choose to join or give a FeederWatch membership as a gift. So there's options here. The Canadian links here will bring you to Birds Canada to fill out that membership. So you'll see also on our homepage, we have a whole bunch of tabs here along the top. I'll go through some interesting links under each of them. Under the About tab, probably the most interesting thing on here is our detailed instructions. That's where you're going to be able to read all the details you need about how to count, what birds not to count, how to choose your count site. Basically, everything you need to know to get started is going to be there. Under our Learn tab, this one I really encourage folks to take a look at because there's so many interesting articles. But I'm going to just highlight a couple here. Our Common Feeder Birds Interactive. I'm going to click on it in just a second here. It's super interesting because it's going to, well, let me just click into it because I think that's going to be easiest to show you as we look at it. So you'll view bird list. So this is going to list out probably about 100 of the most common species that visit bird feeders. And what we really like about this tool is that you can use these filters on the left to choose your region. Let's just say the Northeast, because that's where we are. What kind of food you're providing. So maybe I'm providing black oil sunflower seeds. And you can scroll down to the feeder type that you provide. So let's just say I've got black oil sunflower seeds in a large tube feeder. Now on the right, you notice that all of those birds were kind of shifting around. This was filtering out all of those 100 species so we can see which ones are most likely to visit a large tube feeder filled with sunflower seeds in the Northeast. Now it is kind of top level here, and not every location in the Northeast is going to see a gray jay or an evening grosbeak every year. But this is a really great idea to kind of get a great way to get an idea of what birds might visit a feeder of that specific type. Now, if you reset all these feeders, you'll have that whole list again. And the other way you can use this tool is you can click into, let's say, for example, this boreal chickadee. It's a really cute little bird that lives mostly in Canada. You can click into that species page. You'll get a nice close-up view. And as you scroll down, you'll have all of the information you need to attract that species to your count site. So you can see where it normally lives, what kind of foods you can put out to attract it, and the best kind of feeders to provide those foods. So we've got some really helpful information. If you're sitting there and you're like, I've never seen a cardinal before, I really want to get a cardinal to my feeders, you can click on the cardinal in this tool and learn everything you need to know to have the best chance at getting one to come to your yard. Probably my favorite tool on the website. Other interesting things, we've got tricky bird IDs over here. So if you're having trouble identifying between black-capped and Carolina chickadees, or house finches and purple finches, or sharp-shinned hawks and Cooper's hawks, we've got some really helpful articles, right there, that'll help you tell the differences. On our community tab, we've got some really cool bird photo galleries, and you can submit your own photos to our participant photos here. Our Explore tab helps you explore project-wide data, a whole bunch of different ways. We've got, trend graphs and our year-end reports. And this is where the scientific articles where you see all of those journal articles that Emma was mentioning. And then here on your data is how you enter data for FeederWatch. And that brings you right to your data entry homepage. You've got all these options to enter your bird counts, create your count site so you can tell us about the habitat around it, and explore your own data. Is there anything else I'm missing, guys? All right,
that looks good to me.
Trying to be pretty succinct, but there's just so much information on the website.
Yeah, the website is a super great resource. I use it all the time when I'm, communicating stuff about bird cams or thinking about feeder birds. Especially the Common Feeder Birds resource all the time.
I'll just say too that everything except the data entry portion of the website, that's all freely accessible. So you don't need to sign up for FeederWatch in order to use that cool interactive tool that I showed you, or to look at our data, our project-wide data. So I just want to make that clear.
Awesome, lots of great resources. All right, before we delve into the more general questions about bird feeding that we've had people send in, I just had a couple of ones particular to Project FeederWatch that have come in. We talked about the season. Say you're a first-year Project FeederWatcher and you're signing up for the first time, you're new to the experience. What is one piece of advice that you'd have for a first-year participant?
That's a tough one because I feel like there's no one big thing, but probably my piece of advice would be to just have fun, and enjoy yourself. That's the big part of this, is helping, letting you enjoy yourself while also having this opportunity to collect data and share it with the wider scientific community.
Yeah, and I would say my piece of advice would be, don't feel overwhelmed by the birds that you see outside if you don't know what they all are. Just remember, there's probably only a dozen showing up. Just take your time, and if you get confused, you can always email us or use one of the resources online to figure it out. You'll learn them in time. So that's my advice.
And Emma, that kind of goes along with another question we received is, if people are, it can be sort of a daunting task to start to learn bird species that visit your backyard. And if they become more comfortable with it and they realize, oh, hey, I misidentified this bird in one of my counts. Can they go back and fix that somehow? Or how do people enter their counts, and how does that process work?
Yeah, you sure can go back and edit anything. Maybe you've learned that thing that you thought was a house sparrow. Oh my goodness, now it's a white-throated sparrow, and you didn't even know what that was. Well, you can go back and change anything you need to in your counts. There's a little procedure to do it. You got to get into the counts and a little table, and you click an edit button. But anyway, we can, I don't know if it's worth a walkthrough now, or if it comes up, you send us an email and we'll walk you through it if need be.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. If they ever have a problem like that, just email us and we'll help give you instructions on how to fix it up. If you have a bird that you don't know what it is, send us a picture or describe it to us, and we'll do our best to help you identify it. We really are here to help.
Awesome. So we have people there to answer your questions if you have any for submitting your counts. And we did have another one. Is the website the only way to enter your counts, or do you guys have an app or anything like that?
I definitely forgot to show that when I was looking at when I was showing you the website, but we do. So entering data online is how we've done it for the last several years. But the last, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, Emma, we were able to create a mobile app for data entry as well. So if people are more comfortable entering data on an app or on their phone, or maybe that's the only computer they have in their house, we now have a mobile app for data entry.
Yeah, it's real smooth too. Makes the tallying really easy. I forgot about it too when you were showing the website. Whoops.
Awesome. And we'll take one more here. I realize we've had a ton of questions, but we've got a lot of ground to cover. So people are talking, you mentioned before that the birds you count as many as you see at one point in time, right? People are asking, what if I'm hearing birds but not seeing them? Or what if I'm seeing like flyovers of crows or gulls or something like that in my count area?
You don't want to count any flyover birds because they're not specifically visiting your count site. And sorry, what was the other one? We don't want to count that. And
hearing, if they're just hearing birds rather than seeing the birds.
It's birds that you've seen simultaneously. So it can be really, really difficult to estimate numbers of birds just based on hearing, especially in the wintertime when they're not singing those common songs that you would hear on your bird identification app. So make sure it's by sight only.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for that very detailed rundown of Project FeederWatch, showing people all the resources. If anybody has further questions, we'll be sure to pop in the FeederWatch email contact into the chat, and also give people a link to FeederWatch in the follow-up email to this event. So now that we've had some time to learn about how to participate in Project FeederWatch, it's time for us to move on to some of the other questions that people have submitted for our experts here. Before we started, though, I wanted to take just a second to share that you don't have to actually have a bird feeder in order to enjoy watching birds at a feeder. In fact, at the bird cams, in addition to all of our nest cams that we have several live streaming bird feeders that you can watch at any time online. And Charles is going to start up a quick little video here just to give you a snippet of what I'm talking about. So our current portfolio of feeder cams includes What you're seeing here, this is our Cornell Lab FeederWatch cam at Sapsucker Woods. It's located right outside the Cornell Lab building. It's in Ithaca, New York. We also have a Ontario FeederWatch cam, which features a host of winter birds from the boreal forests of Canada, like this ruffed grouse. We just put up our seed and suet feeders down in West Texas now that the hummingbird migration is over, so you can watch that all winter long. See the mountain birds visit, like that acorn woodpecker. And then we also have a tropical feeder down in Panama if you're ever in need of a winter warm-up. So you can go see toucans, colorful tanagers, and any of the over 70 different species that we've seen visit that feeder over the years that it's been running on bird cams. So now that we're all oriented on how to watch birds and where you can watch birds, let's stick to the backyard questions. So the first one, we're going to start painting with pretty broad strokes here. People are wondering, is bird feeding good for birds or bad for birds? It's become such a popular activity and pastime, and tons of people are feeding birds. But we've also seen, wild national parks and ponds and stuff says don't feed the wildlife. So what's the answer? Is it good or is it bad to feed birds?
That is a great question. And it is so hard to answer because it's kind of like saying, are restaurants good or bad for people? Well, in some situations, it's great to go to a restaurant and you get healthy food and you're supporting the local economy and blah, blah, blah. But maybe, if you go to McDonald's every day, no offense to McDonald's, maybe not such a great deal. So for birds, with bird feeders, it's kind of like that. There isn't one answer that's just right for every bird in every place. But I would say, for the most part, what we know from the research that does exist on bird feeding, on balance, it does more good than harm, especially if people are taking care to provide a safe feeding environment, providing nice foods. Sort of like if you have someone over for dinner, you wash your dishes first and you prepare a nice meal. Well, you're inviting the birds for dinner. So maybe bring the cat inside. Maybe don't hose down the backyard with pesticides before you put out your bird feeder. There are ways to make it really safe and really a nice thing for birds. And then all that said, there is still a lot that we don't know about the impacts of bird feeding. And I think we can learn a lot, especially by now that we have the ability for people without feeders to do their counts. That's going to open up a whole new world of research questions within the FeederWatch data set. So there is a lot more to learn about the impacts of feeding on birds, and we can do it.
I'll just highlight too, making sure your feeder is clean, right? Having a regular cleaning schedule as well. Just like Emma was saying, it's providing that clean plate when you're inviting those birds over to eat.
Fantastic. And sort of to go along with, keeping your feeders clean, is there a specific solution that people should be using for cleaning their feeders? Is there a good schedule to stay on? We got a lot of questions about how often should I clean it? What should I use? Between vinegar and dish soap and bleach, do you have any advice for people in that situation?
Yeah, so we generally recommend cleaning every 1 to 2 weeks, depending on the traffic at your feeder. And when you do take them down, make sure you empty them. Maybe they're already empty, but make sure they're free of seed, scrub away all that debris, and then you'll soak them either in a bleach solution or a vinegar solution. Both of them work as long as it's a weak solution. I think you do have to soak them for a bit longer when it's in a vinegar solution. But after that, just make sure they're dry completely and then fill them with brand new seed and you should be good to go.
Awesome. And sort of sticking along this theme of, being a responsible bird feeder, that we've had a lot of questions from people that were worried about some of the recent disease outbreaks that happened this past winter, And earlier this year, there's a salmonella outbreak associated with pine siskins at bird feeders. There was this mystery bird disease that swept across the mid-Atlantic earlier this year. State departments were warning against feeding birds, and people are wondering if it's now safe again, and what they should watch out for to make sure that their feeders aren't a vector for disease transmission.
As far as we know, it's safe again. And especially with that mid-Atlantic, East Coast disease, we still, as far as I know, don't really understand what caused that or know for sure that bird feeders had anything to do with it. So in some cases, the recommendation to remove feeders is out of precaution because we don't know really what is the cause of some of this stuff. I would say the best thing you can do is being observant of the birds that are coming to your feeder so that if a sick one shows up, you notice, and then you can take down your feeders or do some extra cleaning and, encourage any sick birds to disperse. That's my advice, is to just pay attention to what's going on. And we can, you go ahead, Holly, you go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I would just say too, if you do see a sick bird at your feeder, it's not necessarily something that you did that caused that. Bird diseases are widespread. That salmonella outbreaks that happened last year, that often coincides when we have these eruption years. Last year there was a lot of pine siskins moving farther south than normal. And just with that influx of birds, there just happens to be more ways to spread the disease. So keeping your feeders clean is going to be the best way to help avoid that. But just because you see a sick bird doesn't mean that they necessarily caught it at your feeders either. There's a lot of bird feeders in the world.
And if you are a sick bird, a bird feeder is really appealing because you don't feel good. So you want to go to the bird feeder. So I think they're often maybe even drawn to feeders, and it makes it look like, oh, that feeder is the culprit. But there's a good reason for sick birds to hang around bird feeders, even if they didn't catch the disease from wiping their bill on some feeder perch.
So the best protocol, if you see a sick bird, clean your feeders, monitor, and take down the feeders if it continues to happen. Is that the best way to approach that situation?
Maybe take your feeders down for a couple of days, try to let the sick birds disperse a little bit, and then about after a week, put them back up, and hopefully you'll have better luck.
Fantastic. And then we got another question about, not everybody feeds birds at feeders. Some people, like to feed birds on the ground. There's lots of ground foraging birds. Is this also a place to watch out for sick birds? Could birds, that are congregating together on the ground, or is there any recommendations for keeping that area clean if they have a particular area that they're feeding birds on the ground?
Well, our best advice is to rake those seed holes and everything that's on the ground up as often as you can. If you provide food just on the ground, just make sure you're keeping an eye on it and raking it away every so often to make sure it's fresh and there's no moldy seed on the ground there. Just generally trying to keep it as clean as you can. It's good.
All right, so you don't want anything to spoil and fester down there where their plate is.
That's right.
All right, so let's move a little bit away from the clean feeder disease aspect and get into some other general questions about just like people that seem to be a little bit overwhelmed with the offerings out there, right? There's so many different seeds. There's so many different mixes that are available at the grocery store, at Tractor Supply, or wherever you're going to get your bird seed. How do you know what to choose? And obviously there's a lot of variation in price. Do more expensive mixes often do better in attracting birds, or is there a way to make your own mixes?
Yeah, I would say that you don't need to feel overwhelmed about it. If you just buy black oil sunflower seeds, you're going to attract a huge variety of stuff and they'll be real happy. And that's just one kind of seed. Very simple. It's not the cheapest seed in the store, but every one of those seeds is something that a bird will eat. Sometimes when you buy cheaper mixes, they have this stuff in it called red Milo, which most birds won't eat. So it's just kind of a filler. So avoid the mixes that have all that. But you could also get a huge bag of cracked corn and you'll be able to attract all kinds of nice things with that. And cracked corn can be very inexpensive. So there are very affordable ways to do it without worrying about buying the fanciest special Finch blend or whatever you see at the store.
And I just might add, this is another great way to use our common feeder birds tool, right? You can see which birds come to which kinds of food. But I will put in too that if you're looking to keep from making it too messy around your feeders, buying whole sunflower seeds can be one way to combat that, right? That's not going to have, you're not going to have all those shells on the ground beneath your feeders like you would normally. So in one respect, that might be a higher priced blend that can be helpful to you, but the birds aren't going to care either way. So.
So there are ways to bird on a budget is what you're telling me.
Right.
Okay, so thinking about, we're doing a winter bird feeding webinar. So when we think about winter, is this an especially important time to be feeding birds? We talked about the potential pros and cons that come along with feeding wildlife, but what is so special about winter?
Well, some of the research that has been done on the impacts of bird feeding has shown that it's during times of really cold weather, cold snaps, big snowfalls, that birds really benefit from the bird feeders. So winter is a popular time because it's kind of the time when birds most can use that supplementary food. It's also nice because it's cold outside, so something like a little block of suet is not going to melt or go rancid or go bad. It's because it's basically in the outdoor refrigerator. So I think winter is a pretty good time to feed birds for those reasons.
Awesome. And we also know that, water can be another great resource to offer birds. But in many areas, offering fresh water in winter can be difficult for people that live in freezing temperatures. What would you recommend to people in terms of giving birds access to fresh water when it's below freezing outside? Can you use like a bird bath with a defroster? Do you recommend those type of things, or is there potentially other ways to offer birds fresh water?
Yeah, we definitely, if you've got a bird, if you're interested in buying one of those that keeps the water warm throughout the winter, that's a good thing to use. You want to make sure you've got some rocks or something for the birds to stand on in your bird bath as well, just to give them a chance so they don't have to stand right in the water in sub-zero temperatures. But heaters are definitely helpful. We've also got, I think we had a participant that she had an upturned terracotta pot and turned a light bulb, an outdoor light bulb on underneath it. So it heated it up just enough to it kept the little dish she had on top of it warm over the winter. So that's a really nice, inexpensive DIY way to do it as well.
Very cool, intuitive. Okay, so thinking about, we've talked about this type of seeds we can offer, some of the other things we can offer birds to attract them to our yard, but what about the actual location of where you put up your bird feeder? Does that make a difference? If I say, have my bird feeder out in wide open space in the middle of my yard, is that going to attract more birds than if it's close to cover? Are there different considerations there?
I think they kind of like having a little cover nearby. Would you say so, Holly?
Yeah, we've, you can put little brush piles nearby if you don't have bushes or trees. But you also want to be careful too, if you've got a lot of birds that are feeding on the ground near feeders, you don't want to have too many hiding places close by where a predator could also hide, right? You don't want this thick, maybe evergreen bush right next to them, because maybe a cat would jump out and be able to pounce on those ground feeders. So it's kind of going to be a healthy balance between having, cover that's close enough so the birds can have a little place to flit back and forth from, but not so much that it's going to hide them from possible dangers too.
And then you mentioned brush piles and, keeping things maybe close to bushes or a little bit close to cover. Is there anything else that people can do to their, property and to create a bird-friendly space beyond offering additional food like bird feeders?
Native plants all the way. Like Emma said earlier, you want to try to avoid using chemicals like pesticides and herbicides insecticides, because those native plants, not only can they provide seeds and berries at different times of the year to attract birds to your yard, but they can also foster your insect populations. And native insects are pretty much, I want to say 90% of the diet of nestlings in the springtime. So, fostering those insect populations kind of helps the birds in the summertime. And then you've got the seeds and the berries when those plants go to fruit. That's definitely a really great way to make your yard more wildlife friendly.
Yeah, that's go ahead, Emma.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna add to that and say maybe the messier you leave your yard, we would call it, you might call it messy, but the better it can be. Even if you leave a patch of your lawn unmowed, I know that sounds real bad, but and it goes to seed. You're turning grass into bird seed right there just by letting it grow a little bit. And you could do a nice edge to it so it looks kind of deliberate and beautiful, a little meadow. Oh, that's a great thing to do for birds and for the insects too. So a little messiness is not so bad if you want to have some nature around your house.
All right, fantastic. Okay, so we've got like I said, we've had over 400 questions come in even before the webinar, and I see more and more filtering in. So we had a few other themes that we wanted to hit before, in these last 15 minutes before we have to wrap up. So I appreciate all the tips that you have on how to, keep our birds safe at feeders, the general things to make your backyard more bird friendly. But let's think about moving along to some questions in terms of how to attract a greater diversity of birds or specific species that you may want to, specifically attract at your feeders. You mentioned that the common bird feeder tool that you had on Project FeederWatch, but we did have some specific questions related to a few different species. And if Charles has a clip, I'll show you just a link of or a quick highlight of some of the species we had questions about that we've had on the cam. So pileated woodpeckers, they're always a big highlight at the feeder, and we get a lot of questions. Hummingbirds, of course, people love hummingbirds. We had a lot of questions about, how to properly feed hummingbirds. And then we're also talking about those winter finches like grosbeaks and things like that. So for, I know we're running short on time here, but to do some quick hitting questions here. So we mentioned black oil sunflower seeds are a great way at attracting a wide diversity of species. Are there any other seeds people can mix up and add in addition to those that are great, sort of like broad spectrum, everybody loves them type of foods to offer?
I'd say the most energy rich foods are going to be the sunflower seeds, peanuts, suet, and thistle. And thistle is a really good one for attracting finches specifically. Suet, woodpeckers are usually all over that, and a bunch of other species. But yeah, when you're looking at all the different bird foods, those are the most energy rich usually. So provide the most bang for their buck.
Awesome. And we talked about woodpeckers and suet. Is there anything else is suet the main thing for woodpeckers? Or is there anything you can do to attract those large species like pileated woodpeckers, like certain types of feeders are better than others?
I would say if you're looking to attract some pileated woodpeckers, it's going to be probably more about the habitat that's around your yard as well. They really like big, deep woods. So if you're living in the middle of suburbia, it's going to be a lot more of a chance that you're going to attract them, rather than if you had lived, right next to a big forest. By having one of those double suet feeders or something that's a little bit bigger than your average size, will at least give you a leg up. We can't predict who's going to arrive at your feeders, but you can do the best you can to try and attack them.
If you can set yourself up for success.
Right.
So what about hummingbird feeders? We had a question in asking people about hummingbird feeders. Can we still feed hummingbirds over winter in certain areas? And if we're feeding hummingbirds and other birds, how should we be placing those feeders? Should they be all together? Should hummingbird feeders be separated?
You can certainly feed hummingbirds as long as they're around. So if you have them in winter, and some places do in the US and Canada, then go right ahead. They will, do what they need to do. They'll migrate if they need to migrate. So you don't have to worry about tricking them into staying someplace that's not good for them. But in terms of placement, I don't know that I've ever given that any thought about where to put the hummingbird feeder in relation to the bird seed feeders. I don't know, Holly, is there any tips about that you've thought about?
The only thing I can think of is sometimes when we have folks asking, how can they discourage small mammals from getting to their feeders? They have feeders spread out, and maybe you've only got one squirrel that's been really, trying to get to your feeder. If you spread your feeders out, well, that squirrel can really only get to one feeder at a time, right? So sometimes keeping them farther apart from each other can be helpful, but in terms of, there's no rule about how far apart feeders need to be or how close they need to be. So.
All right, good to know. I will say from my experiences putting up the Cornell FeederWatch cam and filling it there, we used to give hummingbirds or try to feed hummingbirds there, but they would always stick around the flowers outside away from the larger birds. But we get a lot of them running through West Texas on their migration routes, so we just stick with those.
Yeah, it might be more of a situational thing, right? So if you're noticing that you're not getting a lot of hummingbirds, maybe you move that one a little bit farther away from the feeders that are attracting bigger birds. Just a trial and error sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. Trial and error is a lot of figuring out what works with your space.
Yes.
And then one final question, talking about those winter species, like we talked, we saw the evening grosbeaks, pine grosbeaks, red-breasted nuthatches, all those birds that sometimes erupt to areas south of their normal range. Last year was a banner year for these eruptions. Do we know what it's going to be like this winter at all? Are we expecting a lot of eruptive migrants, or is it sort of a slower year?
They usually do not do 2 consecutive big years. So I would be very surprised if this was an eruptive year. And I don't know that we've I'm not hearing about anything. If it were, you would maybe already be hearing about some of these birds showing up at feeders. So I think it might be a little quiet on the finch front this winter.
Well, usually I think there's something out there called the winter finch forecast, right? So that somebody sends out their predictions for the year, and I haven't heard any big predictions for this year, I think, in terms of big numbers. So you never know what'll happen, but sounds like it'll be slower.
Yeah, you might get lucky, but probably not as lucky as you were last year when there were so many sightings.
That's right.
All right, so it's clear that there are certain species that are universally loved by backyard bird feeder people, enthusiasts, but we know there's also other species that maybe people don't want to attract or would rather they didn't visit their backyard feeders. So we've seen some of these species on cam. They include, I think Charles is going to play a little clip of the type of species we've seen, like common grackles, European starlings. Even though we don't mind seeing them at our bird feeder, sometimes people associate them as more of a pest or an unwanted bird species. And then on the other hand, you also get birds that eat other birds, sometimes congregating at bird feeders. We've seen sharp-shinned and Cooper's hawks at the bird feeder coming in and trying to grab an easy meal. And that's not usually what people are interested in when they're setting up their backyard bird feeder, is providing a buffet for these raptors, right? So we wanted to ask a few questions about deterring some of these types of species. Number one, house sparrows. That's the most common question we've got about house sparrows. They're overrunning people's feeders. Is there anything people can do to deter house sparrows and leave the food for the rest of the birds?
Well, there's no 100% guaranteed way to completely keep them away from your feeders, unfortunately. But there's a few different ways that people have figured out to kind of deter them. Some people take their feeders in for a little while and let them disperse and then put them back out a few days later. Some people use safflower seed, which house sparrows seem to dislike, but we've definitely heard reports of some other house sparrows eating it. They don't prefer it, let's put it that way. And then there's also some things out there called halos. It's basically a little contraption. You can make one homemade out of fishing line and washers that has been shown to help deter them from your feeders. But again, these are all case-by-case basis. Sometimes the birds get used to them. Sorry, I don't have a better answer for that.
Yeah, and I think you guys have a diagram of sort of what those halos look like on your website, right?
Yeah, we have some tips on our website specifically geared towards house sparrows, and we definitely encourage you to try them. We just can't guarantee any of them will be 100% permanent.
Yeah, it's always a cat and mouse game when it comes to attracting certain birds or deterring others. You never know if what's going to work out. You just go with what works for you. So we also had a lot of questions sort of about bigger birds taking up all the space of the feeders, eating up all the food. We got stories of crows eating all the peanuts left out for blue jays. In New York City, the pigeons are eating everything they put out for other birds. And then we also had one, grackles and starlings are swarming. I can't leave out anything for the smaller birds because they eat it all. Is there anything people can do sort of to deter those type of birds and leave the food for the rest of them?
You want to get this one, Emma, or do you want to?
Yeah, I can try. I always find these to be the most difficult questions, and I just think, oh man, maybe just don't worry about it. Buy some cheaper bird seed for a while. But I do understand it can be annoying. For some of these bigger birds, though, you can get feeders that, I mean, if you really want to go all out, that sort of have little doors that shut if a heavy bird lands on it, so only little birds can land on the feeder. You could get things with real tube feeders, real small ones with real small perches that a crow couldn't even get to. So those are some ideas.
And I would suggest,
No, you go ahead.
I would suggest too, you can try spreading your feeders out, right? So if there's one crow that's really being a bully to everybody else, again, he can only visit one feeder at a time. So spreading your feeders out might be an option. And then there's also, only providing maybe a cup of birdseed. If you're trying to save money and not, have the birds buy you at a house and home, maybe just put out 1 or 2 cups of food at a time, less seed at a time, and have maybe more gaps where there isn't so much seed. And then maybe that'll help discourage them from finding it. At least they won't be eating so much of your seed all at once in such a short order.
Yeah, and you could have like a nice appealing platform of cracked corn off to one side where maybe all the house sparrows would go, but your thistle sock is somewhere else. So in that, you can kind of partition who goes to what, because some of these bigger, more annoying birds might be real happy with a big platform of cheap bird seed. But those big flocks of blackbirds, I just want to point out, they are often very temporary. They will flock up during the fall, and then you notice them and you think, God, it's a disaster, but they will often move on and not stick around. So if you're noticing them just showing up in the spring or fall, they may go away on their own. They sometimes do. So that's something to keep in mind too with those blackbirds.
Awesome. Well, we're running short on time. We got about 5 minutes left. I've got one more question on this theme, and then we'll move on and just do kind of give us everything you got on our last little bit, and then we'll wrap up for the day. So we showed the picture or showed the highlight of the hawk coming to the bird feeders, and this is a common theme that we hear. People are always running in, how can I keep raptors away from poaching birds at my bird feeder? Do you have any advice for people that are experiencing that?
I think enjoy the raptor sightings. They are a cool native group of birds. They're going to eat a bird somewhere, whether you see that happen or not. So enjoy it. They're great to have around. Now, that's the best advice I have. Plus, there's nothing you can do about it. They're super protected, so you can't be harming them.
Awesome. Okay, so let's move on to our last little bit here. We might run a minute or two over, but people can stay on if they want to. Now, we were talking about birds that people might, different species that people might not want to attract to their feeders. But of course, anybody that has fed birds in the past has experienced attracting more than birds, right? Of course, we have squirrels. They are probably the most common culprit when it comes to raiding a bird feeder. There's also raccoons. We've had a raccoon experience on our West Texas feeder cam at night. They took down our hummingbird feeder in pretty short order. And things like possums, bears, all of these things, outdoor cats, they're all things that could, at varying levels pose not necessarily, some animals might pose a threat to your bird feeders, right? Some of them might pose a threat to the birds at your feeders, while others are just, there for the bounty of the feeders. So what advice would you have for people to, keeping these various levels of non-avian feeder visitors at bay, whether it be squirrels or moving up to the larger animals that might actually take down your feeders?
Yeah, so I can speak to some of the other mammals there. Some that visit it, if your mammals like raccoons or possums only visit at night, take your feeders in at night. If you put them out in the morning and take them in before you go to bed, then that makes it harder for those night visitors to visit. And also, if you live in an area with bears, we definitely recommend keeping feeders inside unless the bears are in hibernation. Just to keep it safe on all bouts. Not only can it be dangerous for a bear to associate your home with food, so it can be dangerous for you, it's also dangerous for the bear, because if the bear becomes a nuisance bear, we've all heard those stories about the ones that have to be relocated or euthanized for unnecessarily. So it's good to just keep in mind of your native mammals and what's safe for them as well.
And then I've heard a lot of people saying for squirrels, you can use like capsaicin or like hot pepper stuff. Do you recommend, utilizing that as a way to deter smaller mammals?
I don't think we broadly recommend adding stuff to bird seed if you can help it. It's probably harmless, but there are other ways to do it with squirrels, using baffles and positioning feeders far away from trees to try and discourage them from emptying out that sunflower seed you just bought. So there are other ways beyond the hot pepper spray.
Yeah, or providing a little pile of food, maybe closer to the edge of the woods or wherever the squirrels spend their time. Again, distracting them from, the feeders that you're trying to attract birds to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing we've had complications with is just making sure that your feeders are far enough away from jumping platforms, right? If you can get them 10 to 12 feet away, there's a less chance that those acrobatic squirrels will be able to get onto your feeders, but they still will find a way somehow.
You will be surprised when you see
you're not 100% successful. Yeah. All right. Well, it's 3:01. We went a little bit over, but I think it was worth it. I really wanted to thank you, Emma and Holly, for joining us today. Thank you to Charles behind the scenes, answering questions and sharing out links. Just a reminder, we'll be sending this as a recorded webinar to everyone who RSVP'd today. Had a wonderful time chatting with you guys and a wonderful time discussing everybody's questions that they sent in for us. I just wanted to say people can always watch the cams live at allaboutbirds.org/cams. And don't forget to sign up for Project FeederWatch at www.feederwatch.org. So I just want to say thank you to everybody. I'll let you two have the last word, and really appreciate everybody's time today.
All right, well, thanks, Ben. This was real fun, and thank you to everyone who's doing FeederWatch. You're really creating an amazing data set, so I think that's real cool.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us today. And like we said, if you've got questions, our email inbox is open.
All right, have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thanks for joining.
All right, bye-bye.